Hi, everyone. This is Eric Johnson, and welcome back to this month's episode of Logtech Live. Delighted to be joining you once again from now very frosty Alexandria, Virginia. I think it was below 32 on the walk to school with my son today, so we're definitely into the thick of the cold season. Um, a belated happy Diwali to everybody. In our household, it was a very quick turnaround from pumpkins to putting up lights outside and celebrating Diwali this year. Hope everyone got to celebrate. Of those of you who celebrate Diwali, hope you got a chance to celebrate with family and friends. Um, First of all, before we get started, once again, a big thanks to our sponsor, Chain.io, for sponsoring this show each and every month. I encourage you all to check out their website to learn more about them. Let's just maybe get into it. I've been off up until today. I've been off this week, so I feel a little more detached from the crazy news of our crazy supply chains than I normally do, but I've been keeping track because I can never stay too far away, as you all know who follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So let's maybe kick in with the news of the week or the last couple weeks. First up, the controversial LA Long Beach cargo fee, dwell fee. I guess we'll call it the container dwell fee. Some people are calling it a tax. Some people calling it a surcharge. Some people are calling it a pass through that will eventually find its way to end consumers. My colleague Bill Mongaluzzo, who's been covering LA and Long Beach ports longer than I think most of us have been alive, has been on top of this story from the outset. I think he was the first to report it at the beginning of last week. I have this story up because I think this story gets to the crux of what the fee is really all about, which is trying to find a way to induce shippers with very favorable dwell arrangements in their contracts with carriers to move their boxes out of the terminal as quickly as possible, terminals, I should say, as quickly as possible. There's been a lot of chatter about whether this fee is good, terrible, legal, whether it should be, whether we should be finding other ways to induce better cargo flow, including addressing the fact that a lot of empties cannot find their way back into these container terminals because they're so crowded. It's a very chicken and egg type situation. But if you take the view that this is also an 80-20 rule kind of situation where a certain number of small defined parties might be creating a gridlock that is sort of cascading out into a bigger situation, this fee is an attempt to sort of induce shippers, essentially importers, with very favorable demurrage terms to be more incentivized to move their containers. Now, the question is, do they have the space? Do they have the labor? Do they have the drayage or intermodal capacity to take those containers? That there's a lot of sort of sentiment out there that, well, they would move them if they could. They don't want them to sit. I'm not sure that's quite so clear cut, right? What is probably more clear is that importers who are not big and do not have favorable detention sort of arrangements with their container lines are definitely going to feel this, and there's no doubt about that. And I've made no bones about it. Just because some parties are not going to feel this doesn't mean that all parties are not going to feel this. So it just sort of emphasizes how this is not a monolithic market in any form or fashion, even amongst one set of entities. A large shipper with very favorable demurrage terms is nothing like a small ecom seller that maybe has one container a month, and their entire livelihood, their business model is based on getting that container in. And we're going to get more into that with today's guest in a bit. I addressed this issue a little bit too in my new Substack that just went out this week. This morning, about an hour ago. This is an old Substack that's up right now, and I'll get to that in just a second. But The new Substack is about dual transactions, which have gotten a bunch of attention in the last week, and it's something that no one really even knew about outside of the industry up until maybe a week and a half ago. So lots to explore there. So I encourage you to get to see that. This Substack was from last week, and I sort of took the maybe aggressive stance that we as consumers are a little bit to blame, if not a lot to blame, for what's going on with global supply chains right now. I think we need to step back and say, are we ordering too much? Did our consumption habits away from services, away from things like restaurants and travel, did that get funneled to goods in too aggressive a manner? And in a little bit more nuanced way, as consumers, do we need to think better about what we actually need tomorrow or within an hour? Or I'm even hearing delivery models within 10 to 20 minutes versus what can reasonably take a couple weeks. And can we as consumers send signals back up the value chain, demand chain, to the parties that are taking those signals and planning inventory around trying to meet our demand, right? I think we can, and I think we can be smarter as consumers about what we need. And I think there's a more sustainable way to handle that. So the pandemic was a way to reset that, and I'm not really seeing that. What I'm seeing is we're sort of falling back into the habits that we got conditioned to expect, which is I want everything and I want it at my doorstep in an hour. And I'm not really sure that's feasible, especially as we move to more and more ecom. So let me move to the last sort of topic, which is related to all of this, which is, when is this going to resolve? When do we see a sort of easing of the congestion into North American import gateways? My colleague Peter Tershwell and a VP at IHS Markit, which is a parent company of the Journal of Commerce, Dan Yergin, super respected energy expert, goes without saying. They wrote this opinion piece in the Washington Post last week, and I think it hits the nail on the head. This is going to last into 2022. Obviously, at this point, we're only 50 days out from 2022. The question is, how long does it last into 2022? Does it push into 23? What does that look like? And to a certain extent, and I'm going to quote Peter a little bit on this. The resolution of these problems tends to be like a oasis in a desert, right? Or a mirage in the desert. As you get closer to it, it seems to recede and go further down, further into the distance. And it's always just out of reach, it seems like. Like, we've been looking at this since basically the start of the second quarter of this year. And we keep kind of saying, well, this will resolve at point A. And if you look at the container lines, especially, and they're incentivized, obviously, to say this, but they are not providing a end date for when they expect things to resolve, right? They keep saying it looks like this will be congested until second quarter, third quarter, Lunar New Year, holiday season, next year, right? Or into 23. They are not saying when it will end. They are saying that these problems will not be resolved by this certain date. So it is incredibly hard to pick out when this will resolve. And I think we're sort of entering a new phase where we sort of have to do a little bit less historical forecasting and do a little bit more kind of on the fly, more recent forecasting. I had a technology vendor in the global logistics space tell me that it's much more valuable now at this point to look back 2 months than it is to look back 2 years, because the data is so messy and so irrelevant to what's going on from 2 years ago to what's going on today. So I thought that was really enlightening. So there's a quick recap into what I'm finding really interesting and what some of my colleagues have been doing covering this space right now. I want to bring my guest on now. I'm really, really, really excited to have Rathna Sharad, CEO of FlavorCloud, joining me today. Rathna hi Rathna, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you? Excited to
Good.
be here.
Cool.
That was a great precursor, I think, to all of the things that we're going to talk about. That was great.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to get into what the current situation means to you and your customers as well. But let's maybe start with a little background on yourself. So tell us where you're based, your backstory, what FlavorCloud is.
Yeah, so I'm based in Seattle, and my story is very much, I think, the FlavorCloud journey, if you will. So I started as a developer, but have been leading product organizations for over 25 years. The first decade was in supply chain logistics, transportation industry, working for carriers, forwarders, 3PLs. I built a lot of cross-border route optimization solutions around the world, North America, Asia, Europe. I also got to define customs, regulatory, tariff, technology contracts and what they look like with government organizations around the world. So very much steeped in that world, and then tried to get away from it. Went to a whole different online services space. So marketplace monetization, e-commerce, and then my own personal experience. Essentially, I shop a lot. I contribute to this problem, I'm sure. So as a consumer, the purchase experience when I was buying from international brands was so horrendous that it got me thinking about why my past life did not translate to a great B2C consumer future that we were then powering at Microsoft through Bing Ads. And so I quit along with my co-founder, who used to be my developer at Bing Ads, and started our first company. It was called Runway to Street, a marketplace that enabled SMB brands sell internationally. We scaled to over 300 brands in 100 countries, selling to 200. And those were the early days of cross-border. And we learned that it's not an SMB problem. It's much more compounded for the larger guys, and they need a much more specialized solution. And we started getting requests from them looking to just leverage our logistics. Also, the other thing that happened was that we used every technology that was out there. It didn't work, and had to rethink cross-border ground up and think about anywhere to anywhere and what that means in our marketplace context. But that eventually led to the creation of FlavorCloud as we started getting requests to leverage just the logistics. So we created FlavorCloud essentially as a service that makes international shipping easy, affordable, friction-free. It came from that background of really enabling anywhere to anywhere cross-border e-commerce. And it enables any brand anywhere in the world to plug into the service and go global.
Wow, cool, great stuff. Well, I've known you a long time, and I didn't know some of those details. So that's really cool to hear that. Yeah. I'm a bit, as much as I was preaching about the consumer stuff, you know, yeah. Our family is as much of a contributor as anybody. I think we bought 5 pet costumes and 3 dog like puffer jackets within a 1-week period right before Halloween. So yeah, we're part of the problem, and hopefully part of the solution going forward. So I wanted to well, let me actually first start off. You raised 6.3 million earlier this year, which we reported on at JOC, and you announced that in April. Okay, so I've been sort of trying to educate myself steadily over the last few years about how the VC world works, because it's intersecting with the logistics technology world so much. As a founder, how can you sort of like encapsulate how crazy the market is right now, both in terms of raising and the number of entities that are sort of like, you know, telling you about what you do and why it's different? I'm just very curious about what that looks like.
Well, it's a dramatic transformation, I should say, because I think a few years ago when So FlavorCloud is almost 4 years old now. I want to say a couple of years ago, nobody was really investing in logistics. I mean, there was the outlier of maybe Flexport, but outside of that, you did not see a lot of interest. Suddenly, it's top of mind, number one investment thesis. So I will say it's a very exciting time for logistics, and it kind of makes sense. And especially what we do, because cross-border has seen this tremendous transformation in the last 3 years. Just post-COVID, international has become top of mind as the number one growth strategy for brands, and that kind of crystallized. If you'd asked me at the beginning of COVID, just like everybody else, we didn't know where this was going, but it just became very clear pretty much the second half of last year that this is the direction, and the acceleration is enormous, and we're going to see more of this. We saw that with every government wanting to get into the action. A piece of the e-commerce pie is going to continue. We saw that with UK VAT changes that came in the beginning of this year, and then in July we had EU. This is just a precursor of things to come. And, ultimately it's about consumer behavior, right? Consumer behavior has gone through that dramatic transformation and acceleration. Our purchase behaviors have changed so much, and we're not going back. So that is going to continue. So it is a very exciting time because there are fundamental shifts in many ways happening right now.
Well, and I have to think, it's interesting to hear you say, because I agree. I mean, if I was talking to a VC in 2017 that hadn't
Yeah.
already understood the market based on
Yeah.
some previous diligence or investments, it was a very much start from square one type of conversation.
Yeah,
It's
what
not,
is logistics?
it's usually
Yeah.
not that anymore, but I have to think your model, especially for people who are just investors who are just coming to this market,
Mhm.
and over the last year, is a lot more approachable because you have the connection a little bit with the end consumer that they can probably
Mhm.
identify with more than
Yeah.
these massive freight movements between industrial or commercial parties that they're very far removed from, right?
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, what we do is extremely complex. So, I simplify it by saying we solve three core pain points. It's shipping, customs, compliance. But then, when you double click into each of those areas, it's tremendously complex world. But to your point, the fundamental, I'm buying from another country and it gets stuck in customs. I get these crazy bills that everybody gets. Because whether you know it or not, you're automatically receiving a product from another country. And it's no longer, it was 1 in 3 transactions that was cross-border pre-COVID. So if anything, now everybody wants to have, at least 50% of their sales to be global sales. So how do you do that? It's an easy problem to understand, at least on the surface, you get it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. I did not mean in any way to suggest that what you do. Believe me, I've covered trade compliance for 15 years, and I still feel like I know less than 1% of how to do it. So I just meant there was at least like a tangential attachment to the end
I
consumer.
agree.
That is, yeah. So um,
We still struggle with, how should we put this in simple
yeah,
terms, so that, just so end consumers understand, or how should brands, think about cross-border? Because a lot of times we're coming across brands that have never done this before. They think it's hard, but don't know what it entails. That's usually 60% of our conversations.
well, so that leads into my next question, which was I can sort of see from your intro
Mhm.
uh, why you were sort of led down the path, or you led yourself down the path that you did. But why focus on kind of this international seller segment, and what are some of the challenges that they face?
Yeah, I think I was drawn to this because it's I could see the world becoming connected the way it is. I expected that to happen in about 10 years. I'd say that it accelerated a lot more. So it kind of happened in 5, I would say. So this was one of those, because I started in international enablement. In those days, cross-border was primarily B2B, right? Nascent B2C. So it was really the complexity of the world of trade. It has always happened, but it didn't happen in an e-commerce context. So I think that's what I found fascinating. In general, transportation, supply chain, really massive business problems. How technology can solve those problems is what I gravitate towards. And so that's a common thread in how I approach or what I want to work on. So I think it was those things that really led me to this problem. It doesn't get more complex than this, and it's super antiquated, fragmented, in need of a I think of us as the glue that really automates this incredibly complex, fragmented, antiquated, as well as often manual and error-prone, industry, if you will. And seeing the kind of transformation that we can bring as the world gets more connected, how we connect to brands. The consumer context is really important to me because I kind of think as the consumer first, and then really, let's look at the business problem and how do we solve that with technology.
So you hit on a couple things that I want to get into a little deeper, because these are things that I think about all the time. So there's this very persistent narrative in our industry that technology in logistics and global trade is way behind where it is in other industries.
Yeah.
So I think I may know the answer based on what you just said, but A, is that accurate? And if it is accurate, where do you think we are on sort of that maturity curve relative to maybe when you founded FlavorCloud?
Yeah, I think we're seeing an acceleration, but first of all, I'd say that we are way behind. This is a really you have operators here that are literally 100 plus years old. These are massive, operational entities that are siloed, not just in terms of geography, but even in terms of reporting structures, in terms of, technology stacks, in terms of handoffs. And then you add the complexity of governments doing their own thing in terms of trade, tariff, regulatory, and it's even more fragmented. It is the complete opposite of a first mile or last mile type of optimization. Domestic, when you think about all the problems that we've solved, and it's technology is completely transformed that space. But if you look at cross-border, first mile, last mile, global mile, import, export, and everything in between, there is very little that has happened so far, and I feel like we've made a lot of progress with FlavorCloud and trying to ground up understand what that is, but transforming an entire industry is kind of the path that we're on, and I think it's still early days.
There's no common platform, right, that everybody gravitates toward. So
No.
the way I see it is, if you or someone else cannot create the common platform, then you and a whole bunch of other very enterprising people need to create the connective threads between the things that already exist and make that sort of lack of a common platform disappear to the user's eyes. Am I
Yeah.
wrong in thinking about it that way?
No, that's absolutely accurate. I mean, at FlavorCloud, that's really the fundamental approach, saying that yes, this is this anywhere to anywhere complex world of shipping, and then there's returns, which is 10x harder in the international context.
Totally, yeah.
So to do that anywhere to anywhere, ground up, if you started thinking about the problem, we had to start with, thinking about the world's and building the largest cross-border network in the world that looks at all of the major providers, all of the carriers, but then there are regional, local, and specialty type of providers, so that you can offer a seamless experience to the merchant and their end consumers, to reach the entire world, right? 200 plus countries, offering a resilient supply chain, so that, it's not one carrier that, there's COVID delays and then you're underwater. That happened a lot last year. So you need to think about, and as they scale, how do they think about supply chain optimization around the world? And now that B2B is an e-commerce B2B, how do you do B2B and B2C and enable essentially all of their global shipping needs? And that's essentially how we think about the problem, and how we've solved it is through this largest cross-border network that connects, is like the connective tissue, bringing all of the best capabilities and providing a premium network experience.
Okay, so let's this is Logtech Live, not just Logistics Live. So let's and it's honestly, out of all the hundreds of founders that I've come across, not all of them have the pedigree in logistics / compliance / programming and actual software development that you have had. Some of them do, but not all of them, and most don't. Most are proficient in one side or the other. So what do you think, as putting your developer hat on it for a second, what do you think from a structural perspective on the development side is making an actual difference right now? What is moving the needle in the software industry right now?
I think it's really about, if you think about, I'll talk about the e-commerce context, right? So there's e-commerce enablement is everybody's favorite thing right now, but you really think about the entire stack. I think being that ubiquitous service that or a specialty service, as the case may be, throughout the entire journey, if you will, starting with manufacturing all the way through to where we operate typically, which is the fulfillment stack, really allowing for third-party services to come in and do what they do best, allowing brands to scale, focusing on making better products and better experiences for their consumers, is really what's transforming the industry. And that's starting to apply in a B2B context as well. Essentially, you want to outsource any of these to services, and these specialty technologies across the board are really going deep, and they have it in their DNA to transform that particular problem that they have, like we do with cross-border. And that's all we do. We don't even look at domestic because it is so enormous.
Yeah. Interesting. So this is an issue, not an issue, but sort of a trend that I've seen where I've talked about this before in podcasts, and I think I've even written about this. When I first started covering tech, the issue was, do you buy a best of breed platform and stitch them all together as a user, or do you buy a single platform that does everything you need? And I think most people went the single platform route more often, simply because they didn't have the internal capability or desire to do all that stitching. And now that stitching comes a little bit more pre-made, because you are probably integrated with a bunch of other providers that are doing complementary things, and the user doesn't have to worry about that. Maybe not, well, hopefully not at all, but definitely less than they would have a decade ago.
Absolutely. It's no longer a behemoth, custom installation. You've got baseline platform capabilities across Shopify, BigCommerce, any other headless type of, commerce platform, where you're able to create these experiences, pulling together the best services, offering a great experience for your end consumer. And it's very lightweight. It's not one of those, massive development cycles and custom capabilities with your in-house development team. It's actually a lot easier to focus on once you understand all of the business problems that you want to solve, and identify the right people to solve it for you.
Yeah, so if some of that integration work between really cool solutions is happening in a prepackaged way
Mhm,
before you even buy a solution,
mhm,
um, or it can happen after you've already committed to a solution. You come across something else, you go to a integration specialist. If that's
mhm,
all easier now, the thing that I'm
mhm,
seeing a lot of chatter about, but I want your opinion on this because I don't know how much traction there is around this yet, is
mhm,
things around low code, no code type solutions. Like you obviously focus very much on UI and low friction kind of from a
mhm.
user perspective. Are you Do you see a big future for kind of low code, no code type of environments? Are users going to just be more advanced in a few years' time and able to kind of configure their solution they want the way they want? Or if Luddites like
I
me, am
think
I
so.
going to be able to do this?
No, I think so. I mean, that's really where we're moving, and that will become more common. It's not there yet. And you have to think about, is it an SMB experience versus you're talking about a merchant that's, an enterprise or mid-market type of experience. And so it's going to be a lot different between the two. But I think that you're going to have, just like you can install an app and go, you're going to be able to move, and agencies are going to be able to influence this in a very dramatic way by leveraging these capabilities more so than directly the merchants.
Do you think I'm interested for your thoughts? Do you think that larger enterprises will be able to kind of take advantage of those low code, no code
Absolutely.
environments more, or
Absolutely.
smaller companies?
I think the smaller ones are going to go with baseline capabilities. That's what we always see, right? It's the platforms of the world really want to cater to that lowest common denominator. So you're going to have default experiences that are available. So you don't need to go figure out these low code, no code, whatever new types of services there are. But once you get to a certain point, or you go to your agency and ask them, what are the best things I should be doing? What is the default capability? Here are my goals and my budget and so on.
Yeah.
But once you get to a point where you're thinking about your end-to-end, stack and experience and the best of breed services, and that's when I think it is going to become relevant.
Interesting. Okay. So that totally flips on my head how I would have presumed that would have gone. I would have thought ecom minded sellers who are super proficient at Shopify and WooCommerce and all this, they would be more, they would have less barriers to try out low code kind of environments than a big bureaucratic import kind of group. But that's super interesting to hear how you see it going the opposite way. And now, and you make a good case. Now I'm thinking I had this all wrong.
No, it has to happen at the mid-market level. I think the sophistication of an SMB, the amount of time it takes, you just go with an out of box. We see that already.
Yeah. Yep. No, sure, they want to focus on their product. They don't want to focus on all
Hmm.
this kind of
Hmm.
all the tools and bells and whistles that are out there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I talked in my intro about what's going on right now. Taking aside big vision and where you see the market going, how are your customers dealing with what's going on right now? If you're getting international orders and
Hmm.
you are now jumping into this giant traffic jam at various
Yeah.
ports in North America, how are you kind of overcoming those?
Yeah. So one of the challenges that we saw, especially in Q3, was all of our merchants were starting to not have inventory arrive on time, right? So that is something that we saw across the board in multiple verticals. I don't know that there is a good answer other than, you need to plan ahead for holidays. And that's kind of the message that we've been giving them. Also, as part of that, we saw a big shift to move away from containers and start doing air B2B. And that has been the biggest change that we've seen in our network. So, really moving away from an ocean container to a much more shorter cycle fulfillment. The longest transit time that we have in FlavorCloud network is 2 weeks. So you're talking about very different cycles. And what has been really surprising to the merchants is that you would think ocean is a lot less expensive, and that's why you do that.
Sure.
But that's no longer true. It's much more affordable. And with the consumer cycles, consumption cycles that we see now, I see that again. There's a big shift happening that you can see in the industry, but we see actual, shipments that are happening B2B. The number of shipments doing B2B inbound to the US from, say, China, for example, has just gone through the roof, and they want to do more B2B e-commerce. So that's the trend we're seeing.
Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, this is I've been really trying to hammer home the message to whoever, and I don't have the biggest reach on social, but I try to hammer home the message. This is a crisis of abundance, not a crisis of scarcity,
Yeah.
right? This is
Yeah.
way too much stuff trying to fit in much too small of a pipe at this
Yeah.
point. And it's very so with in that context, this is an issue of, it feels like, for especially for international sellers or importers, it's the opportunity cost
Mhm.
lost,
Yeah.
right? More than oh, I'm I'm
Yeah,
not
I mean, you're
doing this
not
fulfillment.
stocked for international or any sales, right? It's your domestic sales as well. So
Yeah,
you don't have inventory that has come in. Then your holiday is going to be impacted. This is a very real impact to bottom line. It doesn't matter if it's domestic or international. So you now have to make sure that you're stocked.
yeah. How have you been able to like step back and think, how would your customers have dealt with this situation if they weren't on your platform, if they had no tech to enable, the easing of complexity of what you help them manage?
That's a really hard thing for them to do on their own, right? Because they're not going to get their inventory on time. It's as simple as that. You don't have options. Um, and then if you did do something on your own, it's a tremendous lift. And then you add customs clearance and all the paperwork and everything else. It might be stuck for 2 months trying to just get through customs. So you really don't have an alternative. That's kind of the reality of where we are.
So how do you, I mean, what do you talk to them strategically about, like in terms of using the platform to help kind of plan around this in some way, or re-strategize around, do I need to, that inventory that I was expecting to be in fall of 21, what do I
Mhm.
do with it when now that the target date for it is Jan 22? Like, are you able to have those conversations with them?
We've had some of those conversations. I think it's more about, well, that is stuck. There's nothing that we can do to help, accelerate that because the port
Yeah,
situation is what it is.
right.
So, do you have the ability to get, inventory through Air Network and be prepared for the holidays so that whenever that inventory clears, you have a plan in place for that. And you talked about forecasting. It's much more real time. And that's what needs to happen. It's no longer a twice a year cycle for inventory as well. So that's the other fundamental shift. It's not just about the congestion at this time for the holidays. It's much more of a strategic shift in how you think about inventory management and getting more real time with it.
Hmm. Yeah, there was an interesting comment that came up from someone in the audience. I think it was Senham, who had mentioned that you've got to be forecasting like all the time now. There's no
Yeah.
quarterly
Yeah.
forecast. That's useless at this
And
point.
also, inventory is obsolete. The consumers are being consumers. We don't want something from like 6 months ago, right? It's a constant evolution. It's a very different consumption cycle, and you got to keep up with it. And that's why it's a lot more about real time inventory forecasting, fulfillment, all of it.
Yeah. Well, Ratna, thank you so much. I'm so glad you could join the show today, and really fascinating conversation. Hope everyone in the audience learned as much as I did. Thank you so much for making time today, and
Thank you.
let people know
Uh,
where to find you and FlavorCloud.
Sounds good. My pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
Cool. Thanks, Ratna. Appreciate it. Okay, so we are going to wrap up with our traditional gimmicks at the end of each show. First, in honor of Diwali, I'm going to resurrect a dad joke that I came up with a few months ago. That's really relevant right now. So here you go. Why should you never order bread as an appetizer at an Indian restaurant? I'll give you guys a second to think about it. Because it's a non-starter. My wife is rolling her eyes as I say that. So, but I love that joke. Don't order naan as a starter. You're supposed to eat the food with it. Don't Please don't eat it separate. Okay, that's like the only rule in Indian food. Just don't do that. So let's go into the buzzword of the month. And this month's buzzword is less techie and more a word that I just keep hearing over and over. So I thought I would address it. Um, Optionality is the buzzword of the month. What does that mean? And is it important for me to understand what it is? So optionality, as I understand it, is the ability for someone to have, as you might expect, uh, a range of options in front of them at any given moment, so that they can be resilient and they can, pivot away from something that's not working. It's a way to sort of reduce a single point of failure. So you want to have more optionality. So I I'm very torn on this word, because I think the meaning behind it is very important, and I think it's already become a kind of core part of people's thinking about how they structure supply chains. But I'm really tired of the word already, and I feel like it's only a few months old that I've been hearing it all the time. I hope that optionality does not become one of those things that's like a little earworm in our ear that we automatically shut off, like collaboration. And Sarah, I know this is one of your favorite words, collaboration, but a lot of people just tune out as soon as you say collaboration. So I don't want the meaning behind optionality to go the same way. Now, what does this mean from a tech perspective? I think some of the things we talked about today actually fit right in with that. It's If you have a single point of failure, whether it's a single supplier that you depend on, a single transportation provider that you depend on, a single system that you depend on, is that the best situation for you to be in? Do you need optionality in all of those situations? I would suspect that a lot of companies are thinking, yes, we do. We need to figure out ways to have contingencies that are not too soaking up of resources and financial and human, but give us an ability to change course in case something is just not working. I mean, Ratna just talked about it at the end of our call about if you have all your inventory tied up in a container outside of LA and Long Beach, there's not a whole lot of optionality in that situation. So how do you create optionality uh, before that situation arises? So I'm going to give a tentative thumbs up to optionality because I love the idea, but I'm really tired of the word already. So great comment here from John. Thanks for jumping in here. And maybe bullpen is a better and more fun word than optionality. Optionality sounds like too much like it was in a academic textbook, and it's not. We have enough of those. So that's our show this month. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Thank you again to Rathna. Thank you as always to Chain.io for sponsoring the show. We'll be back at the beginning of December, first Friday of every month, 10 a.m. Eastern. I have a great guest lined up. We are going to get into a lot of discussions. This is someone that a lot of people will know and will want to hear from, especially in conversation with me, hopefully. So thank you again to everyone who joined. Thanks again to Let's Talk Supply Chain for having me in this show, and we will see you all in a month.